Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Blaze podcast. Today, we have a bootstrapped entrepreneur, a fractional CTO, and a man who's moved continents years ago and made a new continent his home. And he has been tirelessly working for the last 5 years to build something what he found a valuable gap, the Tech Leaders Launchpad. So I want to dive deep into Andrew's journey, into where the idea came from, how he built it without raising any funds, and how he sustains himself, and what are the qualities of entrepreneurs who are graduating out of college, who wants to do something different in today's new world, and how should they equip themselves. I'm sure you'll find this a valuable conversation and you will relate yourself to the story. So let's dive deep in. Andrew, thank you so much for taking time to be on my podcast.
Well, you're very welcome, Harry. This is something I love to talk about, and the goal of helping other people do similar things, I think, is a really important one.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So there are millions of podcasts available, but whichever I heard are from people who have been there, done that. So instead, I wanted to focus something different, which will relate to the remaining billion people who want to do something, but they don't find the means to do it. Right? I can give you many examples of students who are, I feel they are entrepreneur material, but they're stuck in, we just got a job, we want to make some money, we'll come back to entrepreneurship after a few years and things like that. But there are also other people who have given up their lives and putting their lives up front to build what they believe in. And so this series of podcasts, I call them the Blaze. And this is to tell them that, look, you are not alone in the journey. There are a lot of people who have done this, and my job is to bring their stories to light so that you can correlate what it is. So, Andrew, let's go back 5 years. How did the idea of Tech Leaders Launchpad come in?
So my background is software development. Like, I'm a nerd, I'm a geek. I've always loved the creation of software. I learned to code before high school. And, it was no surprise to anybody that I ended up with a career in software development and getting deep into the weeds of being a coder. But I also had a few formative experiences early in my career, one of which was getting into leadership really, really, really early. So by the time I was 24 years old, I had a team of 10 people.
Excellent.
Not because I was good, but this, as so often happens with so many people in leadership, you kind of have leadership thrust upon you rather than seeking it out. It's, you're the most experienced person, you're the person that knows the most about the tech. Here you go run the team. And I made a bunch of mistakes. I was not very good at it. But what I did do is it gave me 15 years of learning to be better. And so, throughout my career, I've noticed we do this pattern again and again in software development, which is we take the smartest, most experienced software engineers, put them into the role of leadership, and then sit back and watch as they fail.
Correct.
Because nobody sits down, teaches them, okay, your job is not to write 8 hours of code per day anymore. You need to understand the business and the product and your team and the people you work with and the regulatory environment you're in, all of which takes time. And so when it came to the idea of starting a business, naturally for me, the idea of doing something on my first two passions, which are software development and leadership, kind of naturally fit together. And knowing that I'd seen this problem again and again in the industry where we take these smart engineers, it seemed like a natural place to kind of focus finding a solution that would have a product market fit. So I kind of knew the problem area I wanted to focus on, and it became a matter of finding the product and the service and the business that would fit within that niche.
So that's how the whole idea came in. So how did you start? So when the idea is one thing, but what was that one thing you wanted to focus, and how did you start the whole platform?
Yeah, so it originally started a long time ago, pre-COVID. I ran a training business with a few friends of mine where, our business was effectively running in-person training workshops. So, we would have clients that would pay us to run a half a day, full day, 2 day training seminar around leadership topics. And it was moderately successful. It was, it was never amazing, but COVID kind of completely killed that business model, especially in Australia, especially in Victoria, in Australia, which is where I'm from. We had over 300 consecutive days of COVID lockdown where we were not able to go more than 5 kilometers from our house, and we weren't able to even leave the house for more than an hour a day. And so, in-person training just did not work in the COVID world. And so I knew that with the new kind of ways of working, hybrid, remote ways of working that we had in 21, 22, coming out of the other side of COVID, that the business model I was using wasn't going to work. And so I had to find something that would work in the world of COVID, but we were also in a place where the economy was not as strong as it was. Companies were not spending as much on training as they were pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, training budgets were measured in thousands of dollars per person per year. Post-COVID, they're measured in hundreds of dollars per person per year. And so, I knew that whatever I had to put together, if I wanted to solve this problem, would have to fit within the ways of working we had then, and would have to fit within the budgets we had, which kind of led towards this idea of there has to be an online self-service asynchronous kind of mode of getting this training. And I didn't know what that looked like. I tried a few different business models. Like the business model that Tech Leaders Launchpad has right now is very different to the business model that it started with. Originally it was you would pay $1,000 and get one really comprehensive training course. And that was what originally I launched with, and I ran with that for a few months. That didn't work. Tried a different business model. That didn't work. And eventually, once I kind of hit upon this business model, that's when, instead of getting a sale every 2 months, I was getting a sale every month, and then, multiple sales a month, and then a sale a week. And then, I kind of realized that I'd hit the business model when the number of sales per time period started increasing.
So as an entrepreneur, how should one look at if the business model is working or not? I know the measures like once in 2 months and coming down to 1 month, but look at it from, you have not been an entrepreneur. You don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. So how was your learning? I mean, what was it told you, Andrew, this is not working, this is working, you have to change here, you have to do this. How did that happen?
Talking to people. Talking to customers. This is the biggest thing that the biggest mistake that I see entrepreneurs, especially when they come from my background, when they come from the kind of the technical background, the mistake they make again and again and again is, if I build something with enough features, then people will buy it. And then they put it out there and don't talk to anybody about it. And of course, that means nobody buys it. And, one thing that I did really early on was speak to a bunch of people. I'd offer it heavily discounted, offer it for free, talk to people about what was going on with their companies. Would this sort of thing work for them? And, that was what I did super early before I even had any sales, was just spend a bunch of time talking to potential customers. You cannot underestimate the value of that. Like the first 20, 30 customers I got were not because somebody stumbled across my website or I did a Google Ads campaign. The first 20, 30 customers were because they were people that I reached out to. And I got that sale, rather than waiting for them to come to me. I put a lot of legwork in having those conversations, because that also gives you a bunch of feedback in the positioning of the products. Like it's not just about the problem it solves. It's not just about the business model, the charging model, the go-to-market kind of positioning. It's about, like, how do your customers think about the product? Like that's almost the most important thing. If your customers don't understand your product, if it doesn't fit into their way of seeing the world, if it doesn't solve the problem in the way they think it solves, Doesn't matter if it actually solves the problem, and doesn't matter if they can afford it, they're never going to buy it. And the only way you can work that out is by speaking to customers.
Excellent. Andrew, according to you, what is the difference between tech leadership and business leadership?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think, ultimately they're heavily correlated. And,
Hmm.
I think there's, as with any type of leadership, there's bits that are the same and bits that are different. So,
Hmm.
when I talk about leadership in my training courses, I kind of separate technology leadership into four buckets. The four
Okay.
buckets I separate it into: technology, people, process, and business. So, technology leadership is architecture, like how do you build this thing to scale? How do you build it with quality? How do you make sure it's safe and secure, and will work effectively? So, it does the thing it's meant to do. Then you've got people. People leadership is all about communication and influence and empathy and understanding, like dealing with the human beings that we work with and deal with on a day-to-day basis.
True.
Then process leadership is how do you corral and curate a bunch of people to do something? Because you
Hmm.
can have a bunch of smart people, but if you're not putting a process and the system of work in place for them
Correct.
to effectively work. And then business leadership for me is an understanding of the why.
Hmm.
Why does your product exist? Why do customers pay money? I think very, very few technology leaders, especially early in their career, could answer the question, why do people buy your business? Why do they choose you instead of your competitors? Like that kind of business hat of, why does your product have a right to exist in the market? What
Hmm.
regulatory environment does it live in? Who are your competitors and what are their unique selling points versus you? Like that's kind of, what I think of as the business leadership.
Okay. And if when somebody is wanting to start up, right? Let's say fresh out of college, usually people call themselves are developers or geeks and things like
Mm.
that. Before jumping into building any product, what are a couple of things they should be aware of? Because business is something which will evolve and you learn in your life. But as a college graduate or a first time entrepreneur in the early stages of career, what are the things you feel I should be equipped with before I jump on to building my product?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I would say a deep understanding of how to interview and gather information from people. Like if
Okay.
you don't understand active listening and not speaking to be heard but speaking to listen, you know what I mean by that is often when we're having conversations with people, there's this background thread in our mind which is going, what am I going to say when that person stops speaking? And part of active listening is trying to turn that background thread off and
Hmm.
actually actively engage in what the person's saying. I think
Hmm.
that's really important for two bits, which is understanding what the product has to be, like what do
Hmm.
people actually want and need in their business, but also when you get around to the sales, like because sales is often a really interesting conversation where there's a lot of stuff that people are not actively saying, but you have to listen to the words and kind of put stuff together to work out what where is their budgetary needs, how much can they spend, that kind of stuff. So I think active listening is a huge, huge benefit to an early entrepreneur. And then the other side of that is the ability to communicate a compelling pitch for something. So, how can you express what your product does in a way that makes sense to people and connects to them? And I think those are two sides of the same coin, but they're very rarely found together. And you can be really good at one and not good at the other, etc.
Correct, correct, correct. Coming back to the platform,
Mm.
why is Tech Leaders Launchpad different from any of the other learning platforms?
Yeah, this is something which, back to that question you were saying around, why did I create it? What's the history behind it? One of the big things that I found as I was trying to teach my tech leaders. So, I've been a leader of leaders for about a decade now. I've been helping develop leaders, and
True.
what I would always find is these existing platforms like Udemy, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, they were full of a whole bunch of training that was kind of generic leadership training. And, you'd look at the trainers and they'd be somebody who had done a master's of business communication at Harvard.
Correct.
And then they were a McKinsey consultant for 20 years. And, so they'd never really done a real job in their
True.
life where they'd worked in a business that wasn't a consultancy. And they almost never have done a technical job in their life. And I think, like, especially early in your leadership journey as a tech person, you need to be able to resonate with the content. You need to be able to connect the dots. And so, learning about generic communication skills, generic project management skills, generic people skills is really difficult for people early in their leadership journey. And so one thing that I said right from the beginning, that I created my 5 principles of teaching for Tech Leaders Launchpad. I won't go through all 5 of them, but basically the 2 most important things of it are to be a trainer and Tech Leaders Launchpad. You must have done a technical job at some point in your life. Like, you've got to understand the people you're training. And the second most important principle is the content is specific towards tech leaders. So the examples we use, the scenarios we talk through, the way we do the training is specific towards tech leaders. So, when I'm talking about communication and how to express and influence people, I'm using a lot of language and terminology from the software development world. Like, I'm talking about APIs. I'm saying the way we communicate as human beings is very similar to the way computers work when they communicate via APIs.
True.
You're not going to find that on a generic Udemy training course. You're only going to find that on a training course that is specific for technology leaders.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I'm with you on that, because most of these courses, online courses, are like, I will tell you, you do this way. That's about it.
Yeah.
Right? Just follow my lead. But I mean, when somebody is learning, they'll have their questions, and they want the language to be in their aspect. And that's where it makes all the difference. Excellent. Excellent. How has been the impact of your courses on your subscribers? What are the best things what you've heard, and what are the worst things you've heard?
Yeah, the two stories that stick with me are kind of people, both people around that inflection point of going from being an IC to being a leader. One of them was somebody who had been really struggling to get the promotion. They just didn't understand why every year they were not able to meet the goals that were set out by their company. We can have a huge discussion about how performance reviews and promotion stuff in a lot of technology companies suck, because they do. A big part of the problem this person was having was that the company was never clear on what they needed to do to get promoted. But that's not something I can influence with Tech Leaders Launchpad. All I can influence is the individual. And, some of the training courses we have on there are specifically geared towards how to get your first role as an engineering manager. And, that breaking down of, these are the skills you need to be demonstrating. These are the behaviors that people need to see in order to show them that you're ready for that promotion. That meant that, from joining TLL to getting that promotion was measured in a few months. I think it was about 3 or 4 months. They were just able to fully understand what they needed to show and demonstrate. The one though that sticks with me the most was somebody on the other side of that inflection point. They were one of these people that I referred to earlier that had been promoted by dint of being the most senior technologist, not because they kind of didn't really want it. It was, this is now your job. You're now, this person became basically head of AWS at a large enterprise here in Melbourne. And they'd been doing that for about 6 months before they started doing the training. They spoke to me. They actually found me at an event I was running in Melbourne and spoke to me in person at an event. And they came up to me and they said, I have to really thank you, because before I started doing this training, I was spending every night and every evening reading all the AWS documentation for every single technology, because I thought that my job was to be able to answer all the technology questions that my team had, and that I needed to be the person who could off the top of their head, give the answer to any technology question. And I was just so burnt out. My partner was considering leaving me because my work was taking up so much of my time. And then I started doing this training, and I realized that, my job was not to be able to answer these questions off the top of my head. My job was to support my team and develop them so that they could answer the questions. And I don't work until 10 o'clock anymore. And, I'm so much less stressed. I was like, getting through to one person sometimes is so valuable and rewarding to let you know
True.
that you're making a difference.
True. Andrew, I'll switch gears here. Now, with advent of vibe coding and all that stuff,
Yeah.
which for me, I've not coded in 5 years, but I was trying recently. How easy do you think vibe coding is?
So I think it's one of those things that is deceptively simple and deceptively hard, depending on what you're doing with it. So I think this is going to have a huge impact, especially in early stage startup. So one of the big challenges with early stage startups is you have infinite possibilities of what you could build, but the cost of doing something and running that experiment and gathering the data is quite high. So should I build this feature or this feature? Should the product do this thing or this thing? This is something that has historically been incredibly expensive because the time involved in building that thing has been significant. I think vibe coding has a great opportunity to help early stage startups in finding the gap in the market, not necessarily full product market fit, but finding those opportunities quicker and easier. It's taking those techniques from Eric Ries's lean startups and kind of putting it on steroids. We can, a big point from the lean startup was, why build a product when you can build a marketing page and a sign-up form? And if people sign up for the sign-up form, they're interested in the product. Well, with AI, we can take that even further. With AI, we can build a version 0.1 of something so much cheaper, simpler than we could 3 years ago. And so I think, we can basically build these version 0.1s of things to prove the validity of having that product in the market or the feature of an existing product. And then if there's interest in it, if there's somebody that shows interest and we kind of think there's value behind it, we can then build that thing in inverted commas properly. I think vibe coding I would not vibe code a product into production without, having an engineer check everything. Like, I think there's huge risk there. We hear these stories all the time of people deleting production databases, security issues, everything. Like, if you're where the state of the art is right now, if you're not an engineer, I do not recommend you vibe code something into production. But hey, if you want to do an experiment, if you want to do a test, go for it. If it's a case of you're going to chuck it in the bin afterwards, then it doesn't matter if it's a bunch of garbage.
Perfect. I think I'm coming to a very important next question. A new college graduate, should I use the vibe coding tools, or what are the advantages if I use them, and what are the disadvantages if I don't touch them and believe and focus on traditionally writing my code?
I'm going to answer the question a bit more generic about AI in general, and then I'll dive into your specific question. So as a software engineer who is, probably, if I'm kind to myself, halfway through his career, if I'm unkind to myself, maybe 2/3 of the way through my career, just take what I'm saying with that in mind. I don't think the job of software engineer will exist in 20 years. I just don't think it will.
In 20 years, okay?
Yes, I am very confident it will exist in 5 years. So there is something between 5 and 20 years at which point the job that we do now, where human beings write code, will disappear.
Okay.
Which is the working life of the people you're talking about.
Okay.
Now, I think the same holds true for a lot of other jobs. I think, the world in 25 years will be radically different. I don't know when within 5 and 25 years that will be, but it'll be somewhere between that. But I think the difference between the people that have successful careers in 25 years will be those people who have successful careers in 25 years will be the ones who understand how to use AI successfully. That, and so whether you believe it is going to make a big difference or not, you would do yourself a favor by investing in understanding it and investing in its limitations, the stuff it's good at, the stuff it's not good at, because it isn't good at everything. But if you don't understand what it is good at and what it isn't good at, then you have no hope of having that massively successful career. I don't believe in the next 25 years. Maybe in the next 5 years, maybe in the next 10 years, but I don't think in the next 25. So I think irrespective of the specific question you asked around vibe coding, I think everybody leaving college these days needs to understand AI. They need to understand what it's good at, what it's bad at, how to use it effectively, when to use it and when not to use it. And, they need to put some time aside every month or 2 or 6. Where is the state of the art? How is this changing? Because they will be the ones that are most impacted by it. You and I, Harry, are probably going to be retired before Skynet comes along, but they probably won't be. To your vibe coding question, I think there's businesses. It's not true that that a business is in one mode of operating for its entire life. It goes through different modes of operating. And the very early stages of operating a business are about finding that product market fit, are about finding the thing that adds value and that people will pay for. I think those stages of the business, vibe coding is a great use of time and a great tool to use. When you find product market fit and you're building something that instead of being used by 5 people is being used by 50, 500, 5,000 people, that's when I think the traditional software engineering techniques are the right choice, especially right now. Where we are. I think the risk is using the wrong technique at the wrong time. If you use deep software engineering techniques when you're in that exploratory phase, you might miss opportunities because you're taking so long to gather the data you need to make the decisions. And if you use vibe coding when you're in the scaling phase, you're going to make a mistake and you're going to end up with production issues and security issues and deleting your production database. So I think it's the right tool for the right job, which means early on, use vibe coding for experimentation. Later on, switch to more traditional software development techniques for stability, quality, and scale.
So you made an interesting point about the way software engineer's job is going to change in the next between 5 and 20 years, not in the next 5 years. Now, and you also mentioned, Hari, you should understand the limitations of AI, what AI can do for you, and how should you build your life around AI? Right. Going a little vertical deep, for a software engineer who is graduating today, how should they embrace AI into their lives? Yes, you did mention spend some time, understand what AI is, limitations, blah, blah, blah. But somebody who wants to be a code developer, who wants to take advantage of AI, what should I focus on and how should I build my life around being ahead of the game, if I may ask?
Yeah, I think a big thing is stopping that immediate desire that this is not good. Like I was at an event and we were talking about using AI code generators. And somebody I was speaking to said, oh yeah, I tried GitHub Copilot, but it didn't do my curly braces the way I like to do them. So I stopped using it. And I couldn't believe that this person had said that. Like that way of thinking had just never occurred to me. It took me a minute to work out if they were serious or not. And they actually were serious. And I think there's potentially a lot of people who think a similar way where, if it's not perfect, then I don't use it. And if it's not perfect, then I'm just going to do something myself. I think that mindset is a mindset to challenge. If it can get you 50%, 75% of the way in a task that you're doing, then that's 50 to 75% of the task you didn't have to do. Sure, it might have done 50% of the task, and you've got to fix 10% and do the other 50%. So you're doing 60% of the work you did before, but you're still doing 40% less. And so I think that mindset of expecting it to be perfect is the first thing to challenge. And then it becomes more around, how do I experiment with using it so that I can reduce the amount of rework that I have to do and I can increase the value. So taking that experimental mindset to it is what I would encourage. So, I've used most of the AI tools out there. I've experimented with MCP servers. I've experimented with having AI code itself. So I've written something where basically the AI calls the AI, and I've done all this experimentation because I want to kind of find what it's good at and what it isn't good at, because that's how I make the best decisions about when to use it. So
True.
I think that mindset of it's either right or it's wrong, and if it's wrong, I don't use it, is not valuable, especially to where AI is right now. So, that real understanding I would encourage of it's a sliding scale, and where on the sliding scale does it have to be for you to use it with a task? It's the thing that I do is I have a rule for myself, which is if I have to do something 3 times, it gets automated. This is just a life rule that I live by.
True.
Like the this room I'm in right now is actually a studio, a separate building that sits in my back garden. And I do live streams, and in the past I've had live streams where my 3-year-old has gate crashed my live stream.
Get it.
And so what I do now is I've got basically an on-air light which tells people not to come in. So right now,
Yeah,
the
true.
on-air light is live, and people know not to come in. So I could remember to turn that on-air light off and on again. But what I ended up doing was using AI to generate a piece of software that runs on my Mac, that when my camera is turned on, it triggers the on-air.
Excellent.
And so, this is the way I live my life. If I have to do something 3 times, it gets automated. And, what my rule now is if I have to do something 3 times and it gets automated, can I use AI to automate it? Because that gives me more flexibility. So I think just asking the question more often and being comfortable with, it's not a dichotomy. AI is not right or wrong. It can be a sliding scale. And as long as it's more than 50%, it's probably worth using.
Excellent. When we talk about AI and using it to solve our problems or write better code, for me, all the models right now, what are available, they're all reasoning models, right? And I'm assuming you said, Hari, in the next 5 years, 5 to 15 years, things will change. I'm assuming more and more inputs to the models, the more and more better reasoning it would be, right? So right now, all these companies are wanting people to come in and, use their tools so that they can train it better and things like that. Are there any tools today where without reasoning, if I give a problem, will this solve that for me?
So I guess there's, if we just put a line between 2 types of LLMs right now, the kind of the cloud LLMs that you pay a lot of money for, and the LLMs you can run on your machines. I think the big shift in the next 5 to 10 years will be the complexity of the models that exist on the cloud right now. We will be able to run on local hardware, and I think that is the proxy answer to your question, which is right now the models that I have a relatively powerful MacBook Pro. It probably cost $6,000 when it came out. And it can run not very good models locally. It can.
Correct.
It's just because the hardware doesn't work like that. And so I have to use cloud models for almost everything else I'm doing because it's just not good enough. But 5 years, 10 years, the state of the art models that run in the cloud, we're going to be running on our devices, and so that separation between those 2 types of models won't exist, and the complexity of the models, the fidelity of the models we see in the cloud right now will just be part of our machines that are baked into the OS. And Apple's already doing foundation models that you can run on your iPhone and your Mac. In 5 to 10 years, those foundation models are going to be where GPT is right now.
Correct. So today, I don't know if you've seen the M5s are announced.
Yes.
And the Pro 14, they're claiming that you can run your models on your Mac now.
Yeah.
So the
It'll
M5.
still be a few years. So that the biggest limiting factor right now is RAM.
Correct.
And even the highest spec MacBook Pro, I think you can only get, 128 gig of RAM, which is still not enough for even the DeepSeek, the largest DeepSeek model. But again, 5-10 years, the hardware needed to run those models will reduce, and the powerfulness of the hardware we have will increase, and there'll be this crossover point somewhere between 5 to 10 years where we just won't even think about it. It'll just be what we do. We will have a Siri that actually works.
Correct. Andrew, I know we hear about AI everywhere and all that stuff, but how is the penetration of AI into business models and learning models outside the United States? I have not seen that happening at a major scale because regions are very different and the thought processes are very different. So people are getting carried away. I mean, in India, for example, we get carried away even with the small new thing which comes in America. But the other advantage I've seen is the Asia Pacific as such, my experience with Australia or Asia Pacific, they're not so carried away with what's happening in America. They're in their own pace, they're doing it in their own things and things like that. How are you seeing it outside America, the adoption of AI and how tools are being used?
It's kind of been viewed with a lot more skepticism, I think, than in the US. This idea of we're gonna fire all of our call center workers and replace them with chatbots. Like that's not really something that's happened here. I've had a couple of companies who have said something like that, tried it, and then got actually no, it's not worked.
Correct.
I think Australians, especially are less worried about going, oh well, that was a mistake, wasn't it? Let's just undo that. Like I think the idea of saving face isn't as much a culture here as maybe it is in other parts of the world. And so I think there's that increase of skepticism combined with the ability to kind of backtrack on decisions means it probably isn't being force fed into the culture here as much as in the US. Here, it seems to be more the kind of the startups that are taking a hold of it and running with it, and less so the enterprises. Obviously enterprises are investigating it and looking at ways they can do it, but they're not kind of wholesale. I was reading a job advert for a software development role at Microsoft that a friend sent to me, and the job role basically said you will not write code. This entire job, you can only use AI to generate code. You're not allowed to write the code yourself. I can't imagine doing that as a job. I think I would go insane.
Andrew, I have a question here. So let's take the example of the Microsoft job posting, right? When they're saying you are not going to write code, but you're going to use AI to write code. For me, the way I'm understanding is unless I know how to code, I can't ask a machine to write code for me, because it is like I have a 120 square yards land, draw me a house.
Yeah,
it's impractical for me. I know where my study is going to come, where my bedroom is going to come. I know how many car parks I want. If I want a swimming pool, I don't want a swimming. There are a lot of other things which go in. Unless I understand civil engineering, I can't bank on the design what the AI model is going to give me, because it just suggests me randomly.
This is a great analogy. I really love that analogy, because like an area that I've found hugely valuable. One of my clients, so I also do a little bit of fractional CTO work, and one of my clients, we've been using vibe coding in an interesting way. So my wife is a UX designer, and I think her job is as much at risk as software developers, because the way I've been using AI with this particular fractional CTO client has not been to remove the software developer from the equation. It's been to remove the UX designer from the equation. So one of the biggest challenges, especially when you're working in a small startup with founder-led development, is extracting those ideas and concepts from a non-technical person's brain and being able to get it out in a way that an engineer can look at, understand, and quantify and qualify the investment required and the risk associated with it. So, one way we've been using vibe coding is actually having the CEO vibe code the front end to what they want. And I've been very, very clear with them. The chances of this being chucked in the bin is basically 100%. But the value of it is that it's an interactive wireframe. So rather than the CEO having to learn Figma and build a Figma wireframe that expresses the idea that they want, they're using the vibe coding to generate code that is effectively non-functional, but expresses the journeys and the interfaces that they want. And I think your architectural example is a great way of doing that, because I can see in that analogy, you might use the AI to generate floor plans of things that you want as an individual, but then you take that to an engineer, in this case, a real engineer that moves atoms, not bits. And they go, well, you can't have the bathroom here. Code says you can't do that there, et cetera, et cetera. But you've still been able to express your desires in a way that, is separated from somebody having to sit next to you and draw the design for you. You've been able to get the ideas out of your head and onto some visible form without involving somebody else.
Perfect. So even though you have a job for me which says, Hari, you're going to use vibe coding and I don't need your developer skills, but I still need to know how to structure my problem statement for the AI to generate the code.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So for that, again, I need to understand the fundamentals of software engineering again.
Sure.
It comes back to that.
Yeah. I think especially if you're wanting to produce something that ends up in production, 100% you need that. If you're just building a throwaway experiment or concept or something, then maybe you don't need that. But if you want that to end up in production, you 100%.
Perfect. And how are you looking at the evolution of Tech Leaders Launchpad in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. So interestingly, we're actually going to be doing a big rebrand and a relatively big pivot in the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
So one of the things, so I spoke earlier about how you need to listen to your customers and you need to kind of understand the things they're saying and the things they're not saying. And I've been doing a whole bunch of customer research. And one of the things that keeps coming back in that customer research is that when the heads of engineering are the decision makers, they very, very clearly understand the value proposition and the unique selling point of Tech Leaders Launchpad. But often in larger enterprises, they're not the people making the purchasing decisions. It's the head of HR, people and culture, learning and development. And they're kind of looking at Tech Leaders Launchpad, and they're looking at Udemy, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, and they're going, why should I buy TLL when I already have this? And because they're not the people who are feeling that pain of the specific needs that TLL solves, which is very specific technology focused training, they're not making the same decision as a CTO might make or a head of engineering or an engineering director might make. And so I've always struggled to kind of get into that larger enterprise space with TLL because the decision makers are non-technologists.
Correct.
So what I want to do is I'm shifting the business to kind of be a more platform based, more product based than training based. Because really what I'm trying to do is move when they see Tech Leaders Launchpad, I don't want it to be in the same place in their mind as Udemy, Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, etc., etc., etc. So I'm
Okay.
I'm building out the software side of TLL, adding more platform features, adding more support beyond just the videos. Like, I'm trying to effectively move it so that in their mind, they don't see it as the same as the other training platforms. And that way, it doesn't become a case of, if I want TLL when I already have Udemy, they see it as its own separate entity. And it's not a case of the HR saying no because we already have LinkedIn Learning. It's trying to find its own separate place in the market.
Excellent.
And I think that will differentiate it enough to help penetrate some of the enterprise places.
Excellent. 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 Well, I think I covered pretty much what I wanted to cover, Andrew. Thank you so much for taking time and sharing your thoughts with us.
Yeah,
Really
thank you for having me.
appreciate it. Anytime, sir. My pleasure. My pleasure.